Richard Hill, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. This is a long time coming to actually see you in person, even though we're still a few thousand miles apart.
Yeah. Just so that our listeners and viewers know what you're referring to, we are both involved with the Neuropsychotherapist online magazine, journal, whatever you want to call it. And so we know each other virtually.
Virtually, yeah.
And now we're really going to get down into it. You have co-authored a book on on a therapeutic technique called mirroring hands. I had no idea what to make of that title. I had no idea what I was getting into. The closest I could get to it was a group development process that I used to use years ago, where two people would be facing each other and they would mirror one another as a sort of trust exercise and way of developing rapport. So that was the only picture I had in my mind. As soon as I started to read the book, I was like, oh, this is about hypnosis. Because like you, I've had a long-standing interest in hypnosis and influenced by Milton Erickson and you know the whole Megillah. And so that was very exciting to me. I immediately recognized what you were talking about. And so everybody who's listening, yes, we're going to be talking about a variant of hypnosis or an offspring of hypnosis, a child of hypnosis, something like that. But I'd like to, before we jump full tilt into that, what were you doing before you and Ernie Ross met each other and before you began to be influenced by the mirroring hands? Were you a hypnotherapist, or what was your main gig?
Well, I think the first thing to say is, and I'll say that in a sec, is what's beautiful, and Ernie says it and we printed it in the book. He says it's hypnosis without the hypnosis. So it's actually a therapeutic process.
Sure.
That, as you say, has emerged out of the hypnotherapeutic space, and it really is. I came in as a psychotherapist. I went to the Milton Erickson Foundation Evolution of Psychotherapy conference in 2005.
Right.
And I'd been, interestingly, my early years of learning how to be sensitive to human beings and have what we call sensitive observation of human behavior was that I was an actor for 25 years.
Ah, I bet that served you well.
That's a whole other story, but I'm actually toying with a book title called Almost Everything I Know in Psychotherapy I Learned in Acting School.
Yeah, but, I can believe that. And it's easy to believe that you're an actor because you're very animated. And
yes, I know. People say to me, "Oh, Richard, stop acting." I say, "No, I'm not acting. I am an actor."
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out, what kind of therapy were you doing before you met Rossi?
So the point of saying the acting story is that I started late. So I didn't come into the idea of therapy as a practice until I was in my late 40s. And so that was, I probably was doing my studies in 2000 and early 2000s, 2002. And then I saw all these incredible things, names at this Evolution of Psychotherapy conference. And I thought, I probably should go to that.
Yeah.
As Australians do. But I'd also got some of my own ideas about what goes on in life. And so I'd had written a book, which I didn't know what to do with. But so I went to this.
What was the title of that?
Well, that was the first one. It's called How the Real World is Driving Us Crazy.
Okay.
And it's to do with the way in which our brains, we change the way we live depending on this external effect, this external evaluation. And it goes quite deeply, but let's not go into that one for now. We can talk about that as we go along and let it emerge.
Okay, well, tell us about Ernie Rosi and who he is. I'll just quickly say, he's a Jungian analyst, interestingly, and Well, you can add on to that. He's a Jungian analyst who actually got involved with hypnosis and through Milton Erickson, which is an interesting blend. And then he's evolved. What more would you like to say about him as a person before we get into the
That's
theory?
exactly true. Ernie was always a forward thinker, always looking for where things would go. I mean, he came into work with Erickson. He had his first book about dreams, which he did. Then they did a lot of work together, and then Ernie discovered the power of what's called hypnosis, but is really a therapeutic process that enables you to get a deeper connection with the patient at the time you're consciously aware of it. So there's sort of a dual process going on that is different from what may go on just through other talk therapies or through other physical therapies and various forms. But at that stage, even in the 1980s, he was starting to say, well, okay, this is great, but this is more than just some magic. So he was already starting to talk about what was happening in the biology. And in the 80s and then into the 90s, he was then already into talking about genes, which is only just becoming sort of really relevant over the last 4 or 5 years.
True enough.
And then in the early 2000s, of course, shifting his attention to the next great challenge, which is the idea of quantum, which of course is very, very badly discussed and dealt with at the moment. But people are having a stab and they're having a go. So
yeah, you get into that some in the book, but I don't know if we'll get into it here.
No, we don't need to.
So let's jump to, I think a good starting place would be to talk about David Cheek, who I attended something where he was a presenter years ago, one of the hypnotic associations or something, and he did a demo. And so associated with him, maybe even earlier, I don't know, but is the idea of what was called ideomotor signaling, which
this is really interesting stuff. So when you're working, how do you know you're working with your implicit voice? How do you know you're getting the implicit voice? And how do you know you're getting some kind of positive engagement, as different from just a traumatic engagement, which is just going to make things worse? And the ideomotor stuff that David Cheek brought in was, let's create a positive and a negative. And so he would have this finger rising for positive and this one for negative, or various forms of this style. And so the importance of the process was that the action occurred without the conscious direction of the client, of the patient. So it was something that was emerging from within that manifest as a motor response. And it's really interesting because you go, whoa, that's a bit weird. And this was exactly what I thought when I came in. And part of my journey with Ernie has been, and what he's been very appreciative of the work I've done, is really creating that human sense of things. And I guess the best way to describe ideomotor or non-self-directed conscious activities, well, there's a really great example that we do 3 times a day after a whole bunch of different things go on for at least an hour and a half within us. And we just get this thing popping into our head where we go, I'm hungry. And in fact, some of the time you're halfway to the refrigerator before you actually get that conscious thought. So that halfway to the refrigerator is an ideomotor response to internal biological processes that are informing you that you require nourishment.
So you're enlarging the concept here. I want to make sure that people have got the take the baby step first, which is a hypnotic induction of some sort has happened in the past. Traditional hypnotic induction involving some kind of patter about going down the stairs, and you're getting deeper and deeper. And but what the hypnotherapist is hoping for is to have some to be able to communicate with the person's unconscious, and so the signaling with fingers was a frequently used tool for that, and people would report that it felt automatic to them. Many people would report, not everybody. Some people felt, oh, I don't know if that was really my unconscious. But many people had the experience of, wow, I'm amazed. I didn't know I thought that, in answer to one question or another. So this has been sort of a tried and true approach by hypnotherapists for years, and we needed to go to the hands.
Well, there are a few things. I mean, because equally in hypnosis, there's the induction, all this process, and you get hand levitation as well. That Erickson would have the hand rise, and only was noticing that it didn't always work with the levitation, and it didn't always work with the finger response. And as you say, sometimes people were doing it really kind of out of a charismatic interplay with David Cheek, who was this wonderful charismatic person. But only found as he went along, there were a series of steps which we talk about in the book, but you could use this, and this was also one that was very popular, was can you feel the attraction, the energetic pull or push between the hands? And the essence of what we talk about, this interconnected conscious to non-conscious or explicit to implicit state, is that you're perceiving things that seem to be coming up to you without your direction. So if you're putting your hands here and you say, can you feel the magnetic pull between your hands? And you do, you're already in a different state of consciousness, because there isn't. It just simply is something that you're able to manifest in a altered reality. You believe it. It's a suggestion you follow.
Yeah. And I've certainly experienced that, like the suggestion of, oh, you can feel a ball of energy if you bring your hands like this and kind of start to work with that ball, and maybe you can stretch it out a little further and so on. And
so we get these processes. Now, as I say, Ernie calls this hypnosis without the hypnosis, because one day he said, I didn't say, can you feel the magnetic pull? It just said, and are your hands moving together or are they moving apart? And he said, it wasn't actually a genius thing. He said, I just forgot. and the person's hands went like that. And he went, oh, wow. So maybe all this deep induction and going downstairs and imagining this and that and waterfalls, maybe that's all not so necessary in many instances. And in fact, if we're just sitting here now and I say, have a look at your hands, just have a think about your hands for a second, and I wonder if one of your hands feels a little different than the other. I wonder if one's a little heavier or maybe cooler than the other one.
My left hand right now feels
Isn't that interesting?
Warm.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Because it isn't.
A little something. Yeah.
It isn't. Yeah. But you have now shifted your focus of attention from objective reality to an interconnected reality. And that was like in a second. Now, if I say, I wonder if we put the thing that's troubling you now in one of those hands, which hand would you like it to be? Mm-hmm. And you allow yourself to do that. And let's not do it, because otherwise I'm doing you a session. That's not a session for free. No, but there's a tendency to find this process going. And what is fascinating about mirroring hands is you can use an induction of sorts to calm people down and get people into a heightened state as best you can. Or you can just do it spontaneously based on what Erickson used to call the general waking trance, which is simply the focus of attention that occurs between client and therapist all the time.
Yeah. We need to put a footnote here about Milton Erickson, who sort of changed the whole approach to hypnosis, because he had some kind of genius that would not always use a formal induction, but would find clever ways to draw a person into a trance just in the course of the conversation. And whole tomes have been written about his work and his collected papers. And I invite anybody out there who's curious about this to, to find out more about Milton Erickson.
He was the dude.
Yeah.
But what he said was, he said, this is actually an interactive process. And we haven't so much coined the term, but I think we're trying to heighten the term. Perhaps we've coined it. But client responsive therapy, a client responsive process. What you had with Rogers, for example, was a client interactive, where the client was brought into the center, and they were no longer this sort of secondary party to the therapist's therapeutic genius. And we actually thought, no, actually the client might be important. But more to the point, this totally responsive to the client. And this is why I sit there and go, well, that's what we did in acting school. When you acted, you responded not to what the other person was supposed to be doing according to the script. You responded to what they did, which varied from night to night, which is why an actor can do, 8 performances a week for 2 years, and every night still has something special and unique.
That's interesting. I've often wondered about that, these long runs of plays, and God, I get bored with myself if I'm giving the same lecture too many times,
Yes, and so because you're not client responsive. But it can get like that. There was a wonderful Sufi dancer who was, and Sufi dancing is really just a lot of spinning, and you just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin and have this sort of spiritual engagement. And we was questioned, and they said, it must be amazing. You're so wonderful. You're so connected to everything. And every time you dance, it must be such a beautiful spiritual experience. And he said, no, not every time. And I went, oh. He said, but that's why I dance, because every now and again, I strike it. I connect with the genius.
You hit that sweet spot, yeah.
And that is worth the effort. And this is true of therapy. This is true of all kinds of things. And I think what we've done in the last 20, 30, 40 years is we've tried to control and own the genius. And we've tried to say, well, you do this therapy this way through these steps, and you will hit it every time. And in acting, we used to call that wooden soap opera acting, where you just repeat the script, and you get the lines out and the drama, and maybe the explosion goes off. But it isn't always connected through head and heart, or head and soul, or the sorts of terms, whatever terminology one likes to use.
Yeah. So now the thing that we need to add in here is this is in the context of a person who comes to see you or Rosi or whoever the therapist is with an issue, with a problem, with something that's bothering them. And so right away, that sets up a certain set of expectations. And you've been using this in your own work for some time. So I really want to encourage you to throw in examples as we go along from your own work.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an example that comes to mind right now. Somebody comes to see you.
I made a few notes.
Okay.
They're all different ones. This I think is the core of what we're talking about in mirroring hands. Not only is there's a mirroring hands practice where we can work with the hands, but it's also an approach to a therapeutic engagement with an individual. So someone will come into the room. We begin, of course, with a basic sense of creating that little bit of rapport, doing a few things. You don't just leap into anything. I might even have someone coming in who is familiar that I'm doing mirroring hands and say, oh, let's do the mirroring hands. And I'll go, well, let's just play with this a little bit more. So very, very not regulated. I might start with CBT. That might be the best way we might work with belief systems for a while. I might just do some narrative talk. And at some point, the benefits that occur, the time to connect the explicit to the implicit, the outer conscious thinking to the inner processes going on, at some point, it's there. It's right. This is why it's not something I can teach you today and then you go off and do it tomorrow.
Yeah, you
It,
emphasize that it's improvisational. It's client-centered, as you say, client responsive. I guess you call it client responsive because you're carefully monitoring what's going on with the client
yeah.
and looking to see, are they responsive? Are they responding to what's going on between us? Are they, are they ready to respond to being aware of what's going on in their hands, for
Well,
example?
I'll give you a great example, probably the best example, because it's the most difficult one. And I write it up in the book, which some people said, are you okay with being so open about your life? And I thought, what's wrong with my life? It's okay. So I'm very self-disclosive, but it was actually with my daughter. And she was in Beirut. She's a journalist and she's working there. And a variety of things occurred. She had an event while doing something. And anyway, it ends up, she's got something on her brain. And it ends up being a glioblastoma on her brain.
Oh my goodness.
Lots of drama. We're going on. She's doing lots of tests. I'm helping her through. Thank God I'd done all the study in neuroscience I could help on the phone. But she rang me from a stairwell in the middle of Beirut, halfway home, with an anxiety attack because she didn't want to go home and tell her husband and distress him. It wasn't terrible news, but it wasn't good news. Anyway, she's sitting in this stairwell in Beirut. Dad, help. What do I do? I can't breathe. All the typical things of anxiety. And I thought, well, I'm not, there's no point talking. And no point this, but mirroring hands is fabulous for people who are in the midst of a traumatic experience. Because the main thing that you do with them, why we use the hands, is to externalize the experience. So as I say, we talked before, I found a hand that was heavier or cooler or lighter, different. Then we sent that issue out there into the hand. So rather than being in here where it can continue to damage, it goes out there. And what's beautiful about the way when you're working with the hands is, okay, if I put the trauma here or the anxiety or the pain or the tears, the emotion behind that over here in this hand, and then we put that hand away somehow or another, and there are a variety of ways we do that. What's in this hand? In this hand is the not pain, is the not anxiety, is the resolution, is the possibility. And when you're in ordinary life, these things are like that. They're over each other, and usually it's the distress that overwhelms the resolutions. And the purpose of the hands and various other therapies around too, but the beauty of the hands is we differentiate them, we pull them apart, and we allow this part to get a voice. So I'm there with my daughter, she's sitting there, and I say, just go into mode, and I say, wonderful, can you see your hands? And we begin the process of, I'm thinking to begin the process of focusing her attention on the hands. And then I see in my mind's eye, she's got a hand holding the phone to her ear. And I think, oh my God, that's no good. So I said, okay, darling, you can't see your hands. Can you see your knees? She said, oh yes, I can see my knees. We actually did the world's first mirroring knees experience.
Oh.
But it's the point of attention, and that point of attention outside of the space that is fragile and being damaged. And I put the anxiety into one knee. Then we looked at the other knee and I said, what is strong and capable about that material on your knee? And she used that metaphor. And I don't know why I chose the material of the jeans on her knee, but that metaphor worked. And what was extraordinary was on her other knee, which had the anxiety, that material was frayed and damaged. But the one on the knee that I focused to, so serendipity, clairvoyance, the wonders of the universe, I don't mind. It worked. It worked beautifully.
So it worked on her anxiety. I can't help but wonder, how is she doing with the serious?
It was great. We found Daddy, and is a very enthusiastic daddy. He found one of the best surgeons in the world. We found the best hospital in the Middle East, which happened to be at the end of her street. She went down. There was a new procedure that they've just this covered almost like a keyhole type of thing, and that was 7 or 8 years ago now, and
Oh,
she just had a baby, and
oh, wonderful, wonderful.
everything is wonderful.
Now, another thing that came to mind is partially an answer to my earlier question, why the hands? Because as I was listening to you tell the story, you're doing this and this, and we all more or less tend to talk with our hands, even cross-culturally. You know, it's more so in some cultures than others, but I think it's very natural for us all to communicate with our hands. So that certainly helps to legitimate that approach, although you indicated, you know, your story displays the improvisational part of it and the need to be curious and inventive. Why is it mirroring hands? It made me wonder, were you thinking, or were you or Rossi thinking of mirror neurons? Was that part of it, or why was it mirror?
Well, Looney actually started calling it mirror hands, and then we decided to call it mirroring hands, meaning the present continuous for this book. But the mirror hands was that, okay, I have the reflection, the looking at not so much the reflection as equal. The reflections in a mirror are opposite. So what you get in a mirror is the opposites, where even though our general visual perception of mirror is that I'm seeing a correct image of myself, it's actually a variation, it's a form. So the idea of calling it mirror is, if we can put one thing over here, what's its mirror reflection, its opposite possibility that occurs when we look. And well, actually, because some people say that there's 3 things you look like. You look like what other people think, who other people think you look like. You look in photographs, and you look like you look in the mirror, and they're all different. So
yeah,
we do find reflections, and so the mirroring term is related more to this fact that mirroring is a sense of opposites, a sense of difference, about the same overall thing, but with different possibilities within.
The problem, the complaint may be over here. The solution, the insight, the breakthrough, the freedom may be over here.
Yeah.
And now, I didn't write them down, and I hope you'll be able to remember them. At one point, you said there are 4 steps in the process. Do you remember the 4 steps? Can you take us through them?
The 4 main phases. I'll just say one thing first, because we're talking about improvisation, and that's very important. I actually, and Ernie, as my mentor teaching me this, all therapy should be improvisation. That's actually its problem. This is why we're finding now that there's a lot of problems with the nature of which therapy is better than another, and finding that none of them are better than the other. And then actually the distinguishing difference between effective therapy is the relationship between the client and the therapist. So it's the unique improvisational things that are brought forward. I mean, if I'm a piano player and I'm a jazz improviser, and actually Chick Corea was a great jazz pianist, amazing guy, and he actually said, when he was asked, how do I improvise like you? He said, learn the scales, learn to read music, play the classics, you know, get a nun to slap you over the back of the wrist with a ruler. Then when you get it, then forget it and just play. And so there's an argument that we are putting people out into the marketplace still doing scales and playing to the music. And it takes a while for them to learn to improvise, even with the model that they're using. But frankly, I think when you're working, at the end of the job, if you've taken a video, you should be sitting there seeing all kinds of therapeutic styles emerging. Oh, there's a bit of CBT. Oh, he's suddenly gone into narrative. Oh, he's now using a little bit of somatic. Oh gosh, and there the mirror hands are coming out. Oh, how interesting, all in response to the needs of the client.
Okay.
But the 4 stages, this is the other thing that we talk about. Partly why I think we're having so much trouble with this sort of rigidification of therapeutic processes is that we're forgetting the natural. We're forgetting that this body actually knows how to fix itself, both
Mhm.
biologically, neurobiologically, psychobiologically. It knows how to fix itself. It just gets disrupted from the engagement and capacities to do so. And there are two natural cycles which are just fundamental to understanding how therapy or anything in life is proceeding. And the four stages of the creative process, as we call it, is actually a ubiquitous set of four stages that occurs everything from an atom to the construction of the universe to the outplay of a therapeutic process. And you begin with new information coming into the experience. Once you've gathered that new information, and that may be ongoing, but let's just look at it simply. You gather that new information, then you move into a second stage where you seek to make that information relevant to the self, to you. Because otherwise information is of no value, it's inconsequential, it has no heart, and it just comes and goes. So you seek to find how it's relevant to yourself. Now, that can be an easy process, but it also can be a very, very difficult process. And in fact, that's the period, the second stage, that could be called the dark night of the soul for some. What is this all about? I don't understand why I've suddenly got, what is this job that I'm in? I don't get it. I've got to do this. I'm getting all this information and I'm frustrated because I don't know what it means to me. Stage two. Then we kind of get in here a breakthrough. Ah, I get it. And then suddenly we have stage three, which is this beautiful creative interaction and interplay, where suddenly the stuff that we were doing purely pragmatically before as information, now we're doing meaningfully, and we're varying it, we're altering it, we're improvising with our experience. And then that goes on for a little while, and actually we're starting to get a bit tired now. There's so much you can do. And in order not to forget it and not to lose its relevance, we then go into a fourth stage of integration, of contemplation,
Mhm.
of reconsideration, and setting up plans of how to utilize this in the future.
Okay.
And that,
Good.
if you look at everything in the universe, that's how it works.
There was thank you for that. There was a phrase, four letters that recurred over and over, and I couldn't find the place where it said what it was. NNNE. What is that an
Yes,
abbreviation for?
the neurogenesis, numinosum, there's another N, experience.
Okay, okay, well, don't worry about it.
In the book. Just,
Yeah, it'll probably
yeah.
pop into your mind as we go along.
But this is the fact that what Ernie's talking about is that when we start doing these things, there's a natural set of processes that go on, and it's to do with our neurogenesis, our neuroplasticity. We will create. So as we come into stage one, we're starting to build memories and thoughts and ideas. Then in stage two, we're starting to connect these new synaptic connections to other areas in our brain. And so that becomes then meaningful when we say, oh, this bit of information connects to this bit of my life. And then we go into new creativities, which are broad brain-based, that are all brain-based. And then we solidify it so that because, fire to wire, if you don't work on it, then the neuronal connections, the synaptic connections won't strengthen.
Sure.
So this is the end, and I'm a little annoyed. I'm just thinking I should look it up while we're doing it. But because it's one of the fundamental aspects of novel. Yes, here we go. Fortunately, someone wrote a book. Novelty, numinosum, neurogenesis effect. And novelty is important. It's not new information if it's not novel.
Right.
So if every day all you do is exactly what you've done before because that's safe, then you get no neurogenesis.
Okay.
And then if you're getting no neurogenesis, you're not expanding, and you're not getting that sense of that wonder and belonging to a greater space because you're limiting your space and holding it in.
And that sense of wonder, that's what that numinosity is getting at, numinosum.
Numinosum, yeah. the extraordinary, the wonderful. Otto wrote a book about spirituality in the 1920s, and he was talking about this extraordinary, this wonder. I mean, we've got numinosum. It's very vital in a thing that's terribly popular at the moment, called mindfulness.
I was just going to ask you about that,
I mean,
because your approach is a lot about developing inner awareness. And I wanted to ask you, well, how is that different than mindfulness meditation?
mindfulness is a calming. Mindfulness is a settling and a bringing yourself back to center, which is really important in this world that we've got. It's kind of been, we've lost the expansive aspects of it as we have with meditation, because actually we're so disrupted, we're so disorganized and all over the place in our, even in the first world cultures, and perhaps more in the first world cultures than others, that people are using mindfulness to just calm down and get reconnected to themselves again.
And without judgment for whatever.
And without judgment.
Yeah.
That's how the real world's driving us crazy theory that I've got. How judgment, believing judgment, actually alters the way our brain processes the information of the world. And I'd love to be in that conversation where somebody says, you have this sense of worthlessness, and says, here's how to fix that. And I'm saying very often, yes, but why have you got it? Where did it come from? And the only way that we are worthless is if we believe somebody else's opinion. And why do we believe somebody else's opinion? And this goes as a lot of things. Anyway, we've got what's called Stereotype Threat and all kinds of fascinating research. And Stereotype Threat, look it up, look up. Anyway, we don't want to go there because it's a whole other story and it's distracting. But it's another set of frames again. And mindfulness seeks to bring us back into our center, which is great. What mirroring hands does is then brings you to your center. So we begin with a mindfulness process of let's focus, let's get a sense of self, let's listen and feel your breathing, let's put your energetic expressions, use the hands as the focusing point as much as anything else. Then we say, now let's go to what Ernie and I call the growing edge. Let's not just be calm and centered. That's cool, that's important. Let's now grow. Let's now have a breakthrough and expand. And for a lot of people now, and I'm pleased for it, they're actually able to cope with the winner-loser world, as I call it. They're able to cope by using mindfulness, but they're still not expanding. They're still not necessarily, mindfulness isn't giving them a developmental opportunity. That's something that people take individually. So some just sit there and say, oh, thank God, I feel so much better now. Others are going, oh, I feel so much better. I'm now no longer worried by the outside world. So today, even though I'm getting battered by all these things and my internal traumas and my negative voices and the external negative voices, I'm actually going to grow anyway. And that's a lot of what the mirroring hands approach is all about, as different from just the therapy.
Now, here's a way that you say it differently in the book, but I think it's what you're talking about. And so I've lifted a lot of the verbiage here, and I want to invite you to talk to us about the concept of complex, nonlinear systems that self-organize and how they can produce problem-solving and mind-body healing without overt direction or control.
Thank you. I was kind of avoiding going into systems until you asked. Systems thinking, and the title of the chapter is Thinking in the System. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, what we've been engaged with as a culture and a society for a few hundred years, really since, most strictly since Newton, is that we live in a cause-effect world. You do this, that happens. You do that, that happens. You do this, this fixes. You do that, that fixes. You take a pill, you get better. You do a therapy, you recover. And that's actually not the way human beings or anything works. What we have, rather than this dichotomy, even though in the mirroring hands all we're doing with mirroring hands is keeping things simple, just down to two things. although people sometimes use their fingers and make things quite complicated. But the essence of life is that there are a collection of things going on from which emerges different types of properties and qualities. So you are an emergent property of dozens of little systems, millions of parts, cells, organs, interactive organs, all over the shop, emerging as David. And I see you as David. Your emotions, the term "I'm hungry," which emerges into your brain as a single motivating thought. There's actually about 30 different processes that have been going on for at least an hour and a half in your system that create the urgency and the pressure upwards into the conscious mind to have this very simple thought. So everything is more complicated. And systems theory explains this to us. So when we're talking about how can we fix ourselves, surely the person, the therapist, the doctor, the specialist, the man with the white coat, the woman with the white coat, they have to fix me. I'm not capable of fixing myself. Well, nature's a bit annoyed because nature went to a lot of trouble to self-organize and self-create an immune system, which does this quite well. And then most annoyingly is when science finds that the natural system of healing, and which does in its own bat, it just self-organizes. We don't ask it to do anything, it does it all by itself. Just things start happening in the immune system, white cells start flying, various things, and things get eaten, and then they get discharged. And they call it a placebo effect.
Yeah, right.
If it's nothing,
Yeah.
it's a sideshow. I was so almost annoyed when I was listening to a doctor one time saying, oh, you do realize that antibiotics only kill about 25% of the bacteria. I said, wow. So your body naturally gets at least 50 to 60% of the bacteria. Sadly, with some bacteria, that 25% will kill you. So antibiotics are very useful, but they're not what heal you. They just give your natural immune system the capacity to act. And so a self-organizing system is where a very complex set of elements with very simple set of organizing rules can create a symphony. They can create an organized, integrated process. And we see it, I suppose the best way to see it in a very simple form is in what we call the murmuration of birds, the starlings, you know, where there's hundreds of thousands of birds and they're all flowing and flipping about, or in the schooling of fish. And we describe this in the book, that actually that amazing activity with the birds where they're moving and flowing and circling, and you think, who's leading this? Who's in charge? Where does this come from? Is just based on three very simple rules. Fly close to the person next to you, follow the direction they're going, move, it's 4 rules, sorry, move in the same time as 7 birds around you, and when in doubt, move towards the center.
That's it, huh?
That's it. When we cross the road, you know, so an organized system is where there are rules and regulations. And at an intersection, you'll have cars and they come up to the intersection, red light, green light, they go, they don't go. If you go against one of the lights, you'll crash and it's terrible and all this thing goes on. But a self-organizing system can be seen, particularly in those intersections where all the organized system holds that system back, and it just opens all 4 directions and the whole intersection becomes free for pedestrians. All those pedestrians go from one side of the road to the other, and nobody tells them how to do it. Amazing.
Yeah, so you're saying we're self-organized for healing and for growth, and you say without overt direction or control. So as a therapist, what would we say? That you are a catalyst?
Yeah, you're a facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes, sometimes you actually have to be quite overt and directive, because some people are in such a poor state that you might need to get them a job. They might need housing, they might need a certain degree of calming. And this is a wonderful use of mindfulness, is to get people into a state where they can start work. It certainly is an excellent and the beginning, what we call an induction in hypnotherapy, but certainly the beginning of mirroring hands, which is nothing like a hypnotic that type of deliberately forming a trance. These are things to get you into a point of what I call then being able to have a therapeutic consciousness. And the client is telling you constantly what their issue is. And our great temptation is to help by directing them, as different than helping by working with them. Example, the other day I had a wonderful woman. She's had 20 years of struggle with some unbelievable traumas where she nearly died several times. And we went into mirroring hands, and we put this death fear in one side. And then I said, what's in the other side? There's a number of other things that go on. It's not as simple as that, but we do that. And she said, oh my God, I'm in a well. She was now visualizing. She'd closed her eyes. The hand was just there, keeping her safe, keeping her externalized. She said, I'm in a well, and it's pulling me down. And in a directive sense, I might have said, now you're in this well. You need now to do something to protect yourself. What are you going to do to protect yourself, to help yourself? Sounds okay to say, that sounds nice enough. But in a non-directive, client-responsive way, and we talk about these language principles in the book, I said, how wonderful. You're in a well. You're being pulled down. I wonder what you are going to do now.
Mm-hmm.
Because what if I directed to climb up or to get out of the well? And that's not what she needs to do. Maybe she needs to go down in the well a bit further. I don't know. What makes me the expert? She's the expert.
Do you remember how she responded to that?
She actually said, she then said, I can see the top of the well. I said, wonderful. What can you do? I wonder what you can do. She said, and then she said, oh, I thought I could fly, but I can't. Oh, I've got to climb. I'm going to climb. I'm climbing. And we went through another series of processes. It took, a little while for her to do.
But she did that. She came up with that on her own because you opened up that space. Wonderful, wonderful. I wonder what's going to happen next. And at some level, maybe she can hear herself speaking, saying, "I've got to climb." And in some way, that probably relates to her issue.
So, absolutely. She happened to be quite verbal. It's totally usual in working with mirroring hands, and I think there are a lot of other people where what they call just sitting in the space, holding the space, where there's just silence. But I don't want them holding the space of the difficulty. I want them holding the space as they move towards the growing edge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the intention. Sometimes we hold the space, and then everybody's just more calm and comfortable with the difficulty they're in. Let's not just hold the space. Let's hold the space and move away from it.
Yeah.
But she chose.
In the book, you talk about the need to foster a therapeutic consciousness in the client. And you say that 3 key elements are focused attention, curiosity for information, playfulness and meaning, and nascent confidence, that is confidence in the potential of the process.
Yeah.
So
this is where this is the work I've added specifically to this book. So that book, that chapter on curiosity, and the win-or-lose-a world argument is in that, the elephant in the room, as I call it. And Ernie, even though, it was a beautiful experience, because Ernie, we met together for a week and talked and did sessions together and healed each other and did various things. from which emerged a lot of the dialogue that you see in the book. And he said, I want you to write what I'm doing, and I want you to write what you're doing. I want this to be at the growing edge, not just a rehash of Ernest Rosi. And so I said, well, can I put my curiosity work in? And he said, of course, that's beautiful work. I love it. Away we go. So the essence of curiosity in the way I'm trying to, I find myself describing it, and I'm hoping people enjoy, is that there's these three elements of it. They're not divisible. Certainly there's the curiosity for information, no question about that. We all want to know stuff. But interestingly, we don't always know stuff by just seeking out the knowledge. Sometimes we get to know stuff by not seeking out anything at all and just playing. And that's an enormously important way of gathering knowledge, serendipity, all these types of elements. And playfulness is where we actually have had so much of our academic and intellectual advancement, but it's also for our personal advancement. And the third element of curiosity, which has been sort of shifted off into philosophy and some kind of deeper area, but I think it's curiosity, is the curiosity for meaning, is the curiosity for purpose. And that curiosity is the one that opens the possibilities. The information gets us into stage one. The playfulness moves us around through stage two and makes us not go crazy. Then the meaning emerges and we start to move into the third stage of creating possibility, which then changes our lives and moves us forward outside the growing edge into the new experience. So
go ahead.
No, I could keep talking forever. Stop, Richard. Let David.
You've got something called the basic accessing question.
This is such a good thing. I used it just the other day. I used it because it was an important necessity. The basic accessing question is where you actually use this engaged, whether you've got the hands, you've got them in this slightly external and internal connected state, to ask the inner self, are you ready to do therapy? So in other words, are you in a therapeutic consciousness yet? Because the three consciousnesses I describe is the disrupting consciousness. So when you're in that one, everything's disrupting, and systems theory helps us to understand what that means. Then at the other end, we have the integrating consciousness, where everything starts to come together again, because over here it's all broken up, over here it starts to reintegrate. And in the middle is where we work with those things that are causing the disruptions. And so, where were we? We're talking about the
basic accessing question.
And the basic accessing question says, you're feeling that energy between the hands, or you're feeling one hand is heavier and cooler. And I wonder if that part of you inside, when it knows it can continue with this work, when it knows it can do something, if it will give some indication. And we're looking for an ideomotor response, or perhaps an ideo-emotional response, or perhaps an ideo-sensorial response. And I had someone the other day, and he was deeply wanting to work with his inner self. He had severe back pain from an injury, but he said, I know I'm making this pain worse by what I think about the pain. And I got him up and I got him there and I said, and I asked him the basic accessing question. I wonder if you're ready and if your inner world is able to communicate with you at this time. And there was nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. And thank God I did the basic accessing question. And I didn't go launching into therapy like I'm in control of his universe, because it would have been totally useless and could even have been detrimental. So we actually stopped the mirroring hands process. We did some other work, and it was quite fascinating. We chatted for a little bit. He for about 3 or 4 minutes, he pulled up his hands and he said, oh, this one's heavier. I went, oh, wonderful. And is there any...
Then he was ready. He's letting him ready, no?
No, he just went, and I said, he said, no, put his hands down. So we talked for another little period of time. And he said, oh, this one's doing this. I said, oh, again, thinking, we're ready. But I didn't go, I've now succeeded. I've permeated his things and away we go. I said, and what would you like to do now? Hands went down. And this went another 2 or 3 more events. And then finally at one stage, I said to him, where is this problem? And both of his hands went up to his head and just went like that. And they stayed there. And I don't know, I just intuitively said, can you move that out of your head, away from your head? I wonder. And he went, ugh. And he did. Then we had a whole series of processes, which I'd like to keep private for now.
Okay.
And he said, we finished that, it was about another 15 minutes. He said, you know, I was sitting there when I had my hands there and my back was excruciating. He said, it's gone. I can feel something, but it's gone. And so we then, and I enacted what is the most beautiful part of the therapy, which is exactly what I did with the lovely lady in the well. I said, and now when that part within you knows that it can continue doing this work, this healing work at appropriate times during the day, and when your conscious mind will cooperate and will listen and will assist your inner space to do this work, will we calm, settle, give some indication that we're ready to complete the session? And that can take a moment, that can take a few minutes, that can take another few things, but that principle, and certainly if they've gone into some kind of trance, I might say, will your eyes open? Will you take a deep breath? Will you stretch? All depends on where the client is in this improvised experience. And both of them reported back that they found that at various times of the day, suddenly they felt they needed to do, for him, he needed to do this. For my lass, she needed to do a bit of a climb out of the well. And they said, and I did that. And each time I did that, I felt a bit better. Not a direction from me. Little bit of a suggestion, but not that much. Just an awareness. It really was, I was facilitating their own awareness of their own selves. How many years has their body been trying to do that? Has their inner world been trying to get them to pay attention to their need to do a therapeutic process? Don't know. But suddenly these particular clients, and I must say that it's consistent. I had another friend the other day who I've been teaching this for a few years. He said, I actually get 100% response from mirroring hands, because you're not asking for a response to you. You're asking for them to find their own, and they do. And just putting it really quickly, going back to those birds, they're flying around, they're doing all their stuff. The reason why the thing moves and shifts and the schooling fish is because there's a perturbator, there's a predator infecting and invading into that system. And so they spread, but then the rules bring them back together. Now, if that predator, that perturbator is consistent enough, and maybe with fish you see this where there's lots of killer whales or whatever invading the sardines, this actually separates groups. And we do it with our memory. So we'll have a trauma, but then the trauma won't be there, but we'll remember the trauma. And we actually separate our groups of brain cells, our groups of birds, and they continue to self-organize as best they can, but they're no longer got this to support them and give them strength and frame and context. And what we facilitate as therapists is the clearing of this interruption, this interspace, by helping them figure it out. Then when they can get them close enough, they'll just all come back in again and say, hey, there you are, really good, fantastic, wingtip to wingtip, flying forward, 7 of us together, moving towards the middle. And suddenly the brain works again. Sometimes it's insightful and immediate. Sometimes it takes a period of time with my lass with the well, she actually has quite a few of these experiences. We're going to have to work with each one. Some people, they've just got a serious thing, and it can go like this. Extraordinary.
Now, I assume that since one size does not fit all, and that's certainly been one of the themes here, you don't know how many sessions it's going to take. It must vary quite widely, right?
It can, yeah. And I'm always looking for this session to be the final session, because in the sense, I'm always looking for the client to have figured it out, for the birds to have come together.
Yeah.
So I don't.
You find that it's often more that happens in fewer sessions than might be expected?
Yeah, it's very, very bad for income. But more often than not, 2 or 3 sessions. If things haven't changed in 5 sessions, I'm really looking for what I'm doing to interrupt this process, what I'm doing to invade, and how I need to change and shift, as any good artist does. I mean, is that the wonderful conductor, his name starts with Z, but anyway, he said, I found out that as the conductor, it wasn't about me making them play good music. It was me looking for them to find the spark in their eyes that then collectively created a magnificent orchestra.
Oh, interesting.
This is a beautiful.
Hey, we probably are running out of time here, so I'm wondering, huh?
I go on.
What, already? I wonder if there's anything that you'd like to say to kind of wrap things up.
I think it's going back to there's a number, but this idea that we need to learn the techniques, we need to learn the processes. Therapeutic processes are observations by a particular person in their context that they've pulled out and expanded, which is a wonderful thing. But instead of keeping them out and separate, having them separate, what we do then is we need to put them back into the system. And we need to utilize those therapeutic processes that we study, of which we might study dozens, those ones that resonate with us, so that when we do our improvisation, which may take us some time to master, and that's what really is a master therapist, that we do those that are the enriched expression of our possibility. And the client will then latch onto that, and they will use that to enrich their own possibility. And that's the key. Not master and servant, not emissary and slave. It is this wonderful interaction of possibilities where one of them is struggling. And sometimes that one is not always the client.
That's a take. Richard Hill, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Rap Radio.